First contact. In the depths of the Andromeda Galaxy, the Zorgan Empire had reigned supreme for eons. Their mighty warships, adorned with the battle scars of 1,000 victories, patrolled the stars, ever vigilant for new worlds to conquer. The Zorgans were a proud warrior race, with a rich culture built upon the sacred traditions of combat. To them, war was not merely a means to an end, but an art form, a noble pursuit steeped in ritual and meaning. Their code of honor, passed down through generations, dictated that true strength was found in meeting one's foe face to face, on equal terms. As the Zorgans expanded their domain, they had yet to encounter a species that could match their martial prowess. Lesser civilizations fell before them like wheat before the scythe, unable to withstand the fury of the Zorgan legions. But the universe was vast, and it was only a matter of time before the Zorgans met their equals. That day came when their long-range sensors detected a curious anomaly at the edge of their territory. A cluster of unfamiliar ships, bearing no markings of any known race, had emerged from the void. The Zorgans watched with growing interest as these mysterious visitors expanded their presence in the sector. Scouts reported back, speaking of a bipedal species called humans, clever toolmakers who had spread across the stars with surprising speed. To the Zorgan High Command, this development was both intriguing and provocative. The humans represented a new challenge, an opportunity for the Zorgan war machine to once again prove its supremacy. The fact that humanity had achieved such rapid growth only made them more appealing as a target. In Zorgan eyes, the upstarts needed to be humbled, taught the true meaning of warfare by the undisputed masters of the craft. The decision was made swiftly and unanimously. The Zorgan Emperor himself drafted the formal declaration of war to be transmitted to the human homeworld. It was a grandiose message, filled with elaborate verse extolling the glories of combat and the unmatched might of the Zorgan legions. Per ancient Zorgan tradition, the declaration also laid out the mutually agreed-upon rules of engagement. The war would be fought according to their sacred code of honor. No cowardly strikes from afar, but proud warriors meeting on the field of battle to determine who was truly superior. The declaration was sent, and the Zorgan fleets began to assemble, eager for fresh conquests. Aboard the warships, Zorgan warriors honed their blades and polished their armor, each one dreaming of the glory they would find in vanquishing this new foe. Their confidence was unshakable. The humans, like so many before them, would soon learn to kneel before Zorgan might. But amid the heady anticipation, a few wizened strategic minds couldn't help but note the speed at which the humans had risen. Whispers began to circulate of human technologies and methods that seemed unconventional. Some even dared to voice concern that the Zorgans, in their unwavering adherence to tradition, might have underestimated humanity's potential. These dissenting murmurs were quickly silenced by the High Command. Such talk was borderline blasphemous, an affront to generations of Zorgan military doctrine. No, they reassured the populace, the humans would be crushed like all the rest. With a show of force steeped in ancient warrior ways, the galaxy would again be taught to tremble before the Zorgan banner. As the mighty Zorgan armada set forth to once again assert its dominance, the Empire thrummed with the anticipation of triumph. Little did they realize, as they clung to the comforting rituals of their past, that the very nature of war was about to shift beneath their feet. A new era was dawning, one where the old rules no longer applied. And the Zorgans were marching proudly into the jaws of the unknown. Rude awakening. The first engagement of the human-Zorgan war was meant to be a grand spectacle, a show of force that would immediately establish Zorgan supremacy. The Emperor himself selected the staging ground, a barren moon orbiting a dead star, the perfect blank canvas upon which to paint a new masterpiece of conquest. The Zorgan fleet arrived in tight formation, their ships moving with ceremonial precision into a textbook array. The Emperor stood upon his command dais, resplendent in his imperial regalia, eagerly anticipating the moment when the human fleet would appear and the proper order of things could be restored through glorious combat. But the enemy did not appear as expected. The humans, it seemed, hadn't received the memo about the Zorgans' preferred protocols of warfare. The first sign that something was amiss came in the form of a massive electromagnetic pulse that washed over the Zorgan fleet, causing sensors to flare and instruments to flicker. In the confusion, a barrage of high-velocity kinetic impactors, launched from stealth platforms millions of kilometers away, slammed into the Zorgan formation. The Emperor watched in stunned disbelief as his grand warships, the pride of 1,000 conquests, crumpled under the onslaught. The humans weren't engaging in honorable ship-to-ship combat, but striking from an unseen distance with a devastating new form of weaponry. Aboard the battered Zorgan vessels, warriors steeped in centuries of tradition struggled to comprehend the nature of the attack. This wasn't how war was supposed to be fought. Where was the pageantry, the glory of meeting one's foe face to face? The Zorgan way of war, with its emphasis on personal valor and ritual combat, had no answer for this cold, mechanical onslaught. As the Zorgans reeled, the humans pressed their advantage. Swarms of autonomous drones, previously hidden in the asteroid field surrounding the star, descended upon the Zorgan fleet. The Zorgan point defense systems, designed for engaging large, crewed vessels, were overwhelmed by the sheer number of small, agile targets. The Zorgan ships, their hulls breached by the kinetic strikes, were now invaded by the drones, which flooded their decks and corridors. Zorgan warriors, trained for hand-to-hand combat, found themselves in desperate firefights with machines that felt no fear and never tired. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, the Emperor clung to his command chair as explosions rocked the vessel. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. The humans were fighting without honor, using trickery in machines to negate the Zorgans' rightful supremacy. It was also dishonorable. And yet, as much as it pained the Emperor to admit it, it was brutally effective. The humans' tactics, striking from afar, leveraging autonomous systems, targeting critical vulnerabilities, were unlike anything the Zorgans had ever faced. The Zorgan fleet, the product of millennia of tradition, was being disassembled with almost casual ease by an enemy that had seemingly rewritten the rules of war. In a matter of hours, what was meant to be a showcase of Zorgan might have turned into a one-sided rout. The once proud Zorgan armada limped away from the battlefield, leaving the wreckage of their grand warships tumbling in the void. Among the Zorgan survivors, the unthinkable had happened. The first seeds of doubt had been planted. The humans had not just defeated them, but utterly shattered their understanding of warfare. For a species that had built their entire identity around their martial prowess, this was more than a military defeat. It was an existential crisis. As the battered fleet limped back to Zorgan space, the Emperor and his high command were left to grapple with the unthinkable. The Zorgan way of war, unchanged for millennia, had been found wanting. If they were to survive this conflict, they would need to do more than adapt. They would need to completely reinvent themselves. But for a culture so deeply rooted in tradition, where the very idea of change was anathema, this would be their greatest challenge yet. The Zorgans had always believed that they understood war better than anyone else in the galaxy, but as the ashes of their defeat swirled in the stellar winds, they began to wonder if they had ever truly understood it at all. Desperate measures. In the aftermath of their stunning defeat, the Zorgans retreated to their home systems, a once proud empire nursing its wounds and struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just occurred. As damage reports flooded in and casualty lists grew longer, the scale of the disaster became clear. The Zorgan fleet, the symbol and instrument of their dominance, had been crippled in a single engagement. Warships that had conquered 100 systems now drifted as broken hulks, their crews lost to the void. But more than the material losses, it was the blow to their martial pride that left the Zorgans reeling. For a species that had built its entire identity around their skill in combat, defeat was not just a setback, it was a fundamental crisis of faith. In the grand halls of the Zorgan capital, the High Command convened an emergency session. The Emperor, still wearing his battle-scarred armor, presided over a room thick with tension and recrimination. The gathered warlords and admirals, each a legend in their own right, struggled to process the idea that everything they had been taught about war had been proven wrong in a single day. Some clung to the old ways, insisting that they simply needed to fight harder, to be even more unyielding in their adherence to tradition. Others, shaken by the ease with which the humans had dismantled their fleet, argued for a radical change in tactics. The debate raged for days, the normally disciplined Zorgan leadership descending into factional bickering. The idea of adopting human strategies, of fighting from a distance, of using autonomous machines, was repellent to many. It went against everything the Zorgans believed about the nature of true combat. But as reports continued to come in of human advances, of Zorgan outposts falling and colonies being cut off, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The humans, emboldened by their victory, were pressing their advantage. If the Zorgans did not adapt, and quickly, their very existence as a spacefaring power would be at risk. In the end, it was the Emperor who made the decision. In a voice heavy with the weight of millennia of tradition, he gave the order. The Zorgans would fight the humans on their own terms. They would adopt the tactics of their enemy, distasteful as they might be. The very survival of their species demanded it. The change was wrenching. Zorgan factories, which had once turned out swords and shields, now retooled to churn out drones and missiles. Warriors who had trained their entire lives for hand-to-hand combat now had to learn to pilot remote strike craft. The sacred rituals of battle, the heart of Zorgan culture, were unceremoniously discarded in favor of cold, mechanical efficiency. Not all Zorgans accepted this new reality. Some, unable to bear the thought of such a fundamental betrayal of their warrior code, broke away from the Empire, swearing to fight the humans on their own terms or die trying. These traditionalist factions launched their own attacks on human positions, desperate, glorious charges that inevitably shattered against the humans' relentless, unyielding technological onslaught. As the Zorgans struggled to adapt, the humans continued their inexorable advance. Human fleets, their tactics honed in the crucible of that first decisive engagement, cut through Zorgan resistance like a laser through fog. Human cyber warfare specialists swarmed their way into Zorgan systems, sowing chaos and confusion. Human propagandists targeted Zorgan populations, undermining their will to resist. The war had become a grinding struggle for survival, the once mighty Zorgan Empire reduced to fighting desperate rearguard actions as it tried to buy time for its transformation. But even as they embraced the ways of their enemy, the Zorgans found themselves falling further and further behind. The humans, it seemed, had not just understood this new form of warfare first, they had mastered it to a degree the Zorgans were struggling to match. As the Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, the Emperor grew increasingly desperate. In a final gamble, he authorized a plan that would have once been unthinkable, a Zorgan strike team, equipped with the best of their new weapons and technology, would launch a direct assault on a major human system. It was a plan born of desperation, a last-ditch effort to buy time and space for the Zorgans to complete their transformation. As the strike team prepared for their mission, the Emperor could only watch and wait, the fate of his species hanging in the balance. The Zorgans had embarked on a journey into the unknown, casting aside the comforting certainties of their past in a desperate bid for survival. Only time would tell if their desperate measures would be enough, or if the humans' mastery of this strange new way of war would consign the Zorgan Empire to the dustbin of galactic history. Turning point. Among the chaos and desperation that gripped the Zorgan Empire, a young commander named Zarax watched and learned. Unlike many of his brethren, who clung to the old ways even as they crumbled around them, Zarax had an uncanny ability to perceive the shifting tides of war. Zarax had grown up steeped in the traditions of Zorgan warrior culture, his childhood filled with tales of heroic battles and glorious conquests. But he had also always possessed a curious mind, a willingness to question the unquestionable that had often brought him into conflict with his more rigid superiors. When the humans had first shattered the Zorgan fleet, Zarax had been as shocked as any of his comrades. But where others saw only disaster, He saw opportunity. The humans had not just defeated the Zorgans, they had exposed the flaws in a way of war that had gone unchallenged for far too long. As the Empire struggled to adapt, Zirax immersed himself in the study of human tactics and technology. He pored over captured human databanks, analyzing each engagement for insights into their strategy. He spent long hours in the simulators, testing new formations and attack patterns. To Zirax, it was clear that the Zorgans' only path to survival lay in a complete reimagining of their approach to combat. They could no longer afford to see war as a ritualized contest of individual valor. They had to learn to think like the humans, to make war a coldly calculated exercise in efficiency and technological superiority. But Zirax also understood that the Zorgans could not simply copy the humans. They had to find a way to integrate human strategies with their own unique strengths and culture. The Zorgan warrior spirit, their unbreakable will and fierce pride, could still be a potent weapon, if it could be channeled in new ways. Zirax began to gather a group of like-minded officers around him, warriors who shared his vision of a new Zorgan way of war. Together, they began to experiment with radical new doctrines, hybrid strategies that blended human-style deep strikes and autonomous systems with traditional Zorgan shock tactics and close-quarters combatives. As word of their successes spread, Zirax and his followers began to attract more and more support within the military. Many Zorgans, particularly among the younger generation, were eager for a new approach, one that could restore their place of dominance in the galaxy. But Zirax also faced bitter opposition from the old guard, the traditionalists who saw his ideas as a betrayal of everything Zorgans held sacred. To them, Zirax was little better than a heretic, a traitor leading the Empire down a path of cultural suicide. The tension came to a head when Zirax proposed a daring plan to the High Command. The humans, he argued, had grown complacent in their technological superiority. They believed the Zorgans were a beaten foe, a once proud race now struggling to mimic human tactics. This arrogance could be their undoing. Zirax's plan called for a Zorgan fleet, equipped and trained in his new hybrid doctrine, to launch a surprise attack on a major human staging point. The humans, expecting the Zorgans to either cling stubbornly to their old ways or to launch a clumsy imitation of human tactics, would be caught off guard by a Zorgan force that could strike with the precision and flexibility of the humans, but with the speed and ferocity of the Zorgan warrior tradition. The risks were enormous. If Zirax's gambit failed, it could leave the Empire more vulnerable than ever. But if it succeeded, it could be the turning point the Zorgans so desperately needed, a chance to seize back the initiative and prove that innovation, not just blind imitation, could be the key to victory. In a tense meeting of the High Command, the debate raged for hours. The traditionalists argued vehemently against Zirax's plan, denouncing it as a reckless gamble that risked everything on an untested theory. But Zirax's passion and the cold logic of his arguments began to sway key members of the leadership. In the end, the Emperor himself cast the deciding vote in favor of new rules of engagement. Zirax's audacious plan was met with a mix of excitement and trepidation across the Zorgan Empire. Some saw it as a chance for redemption, a bold stroke that could reverse the tide of the war. Others feared it was a desperate gamble, one that risked consigning the Zorgan species to the annals of history. But Zirax and his team were resolute. They threw themselves into preparations with a fervor that bordered on the religious. Warships were retrofitted with new weapons and sensors. Their crews drilled relentlessly in the new tactics. Autonomous drones were programmed with new swarm algorithms, designed to overwhelm and confuse human defenses. Elite Zorgan warriors were trained in lightning-fast boarding actions, learning to fight in the cramped, chaotic confines of human ships. As the Zorgan fleet neared the human staging point, a sense of grim determination settled over the crews. This was their moment, their chance to prove that the Zorgan warrior spirit could still triumph, even in this strange new era of warfare. The attack, when it came, caught the humans entirely off guard. They had expected another frontal assault, another clumsy imitation of their own tactics. Instead, they found themselves facing a Zorgan fleet that seemed to have reinvented itself overnight. Zorgan drones swarmed human sensors, creating a blizzard of false targets and jamming signals. Zorgan warships, moving with a fluid grace that belied their size, slipped past the fixed defenses to strike at the heart of the human fleet. And when the two fleets finally collided, it was the Zorgans who held the advantage in the brutal shipboard melee, their warriors' speed and ferocity overpowering the human crews. For the first time in the war, the humans found themselves on the back foot, scrambling to adapt to an enemy that had turned their own strategies against them. The battle raged for hours, the void lit by the flashes of exploding ships and the trails of millions of drones locked in intricate duels. In the end, it was the Zorgans who emerged victorious. The human fleet, battered and bloody, was forced to withdraw, leaving the staging point in Zorgan hands. It was a stunning reversal, a triumph that sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For the Zorgans, it was a moment of vindication. Zerax's strategies had been tested in the crucible of battle and had emerged victorious. The old guard, the traditionalists who had opposed him at every turn, were forced to acknowledge the power of this new way of war. But for Zerax himself, the victory was bittersweet. As he stood on the bridge of his flagship, surveying the wreckage of the battlefield, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The humans, he knew, would not take this defeat lightly. They would adapt, as they always had, and the war would enter a new phase. In the weeks and months that followed, Zerax's prediction proved all too accurate. The humans, stunned by their defeat, threw themselves into the development of new technologies and strategies designed specifically to counter the Zorgan threat. The war escalated to new heights of destruction, with each side straining to outdo the other in a relentless cycle of innovation and countermeasure. As the conflict ground on, it became increasingly clear to both sides that there could be no true victory, no return to the old status quo. The very nature of warfare had been irrevocably changed, and with it, the balance of power in the galaxy. It was Zerax who first proposed the unthinkable, a truce, a negotiated end to the conflict. To many Zorgans, the very idea was anathema, a betrayal of everything they had fought for. But Zerax argued passionately that the true victory lay not in conquest, but in survival, in ensuring that the Zorgan way of life could endure in this new era. Slowly, painfully, the two sides came to the negotiating table. It was a process fraught with distrust and recrimination, with each side wary of the other's intentions. But as the talks progressed, a new respect began to grow between the erstwhile enemies, a respect born of a shared understanding of the new realities of war. In the end, the Treaty of Zerax, as it came to be known, was a document that reflected this new understanding. It laid out a framework for coexistence, for a balance of power that recognized the strengths and legitimate interests of both species. It was an imperfect peace, to be sure, but it was a peace nonetheless. For the Zorgans, the treaty represented a fundamental shift in their self-image. No longer could they see themselves as the undisputed masters of warfare, the conquerors destined to rule the stars. Instead, they had to learn to live as equals in a galaxy that had grown far more complex than their ancient warrior codes could have ever imagined. But as Zerax watched the final signatures being affixed to the treaty, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The Zorgans had been tested as never before, forced to question everything they had ever believed about themselves and their place in the universe, and yet they had endured. They had adapted, evolved, and in doing so, they had found a new strength, a resilience that went beyond mere martial prowess. The future, Zerax knew, would be filled with challenges. The galaxy had entered a new era, one where the old certainties no longer applied. But the Zorgans would face these challenges as they always had, with courage, with determination, and with an unshakable will to survive. As the ink dried on the Treaty of Zerax, a new chapter in the history of the galaxy began, a chapter written not in the blood of conquest, but in the bonds of understanding. And at the center of it all stood the Zorgans, a species reborn, ready to face whatever the future might bring.